It was supposed to be a routine morning. A jog, the same path, the same hour. But what happened that day would shock an entire city, ignite a nationwide manhunt, and reveal a twist so unbelievable, it could have been torn straight from a thriller movie. Picture this. You wake up every morning at the same time, follow the same routine, take the same route. It's safe, predictable, normal. You trust that tomorrow will look just like today. But what if one day, that routine becomes the very thing that puts you in the crosshairs of evil? What would you do if someone you loved vanished in the middle of their daily routine, leaving behind nothing but a phone, a water bottle, and a single clue that would lead investigators down a path no one saw coming? This is the story of a beloved mother, a chilling abduction, and a case with one of the most insane twists you'll ever hear. A twist that reveals how our justice system failed so catastrophically that it cost an innocent woman her life. But before we dive into this nightmare, ask yourself, how well do you really know the people in your neighborhood? How safe is that routine you follow every single day? September 2nd, 2022. Memphis, Tennessee. The humidity hung thick in the pre-dawn air as the city slept, unaware that this Friday would be remembered as one of the darkest days in its history. At 34 years old, Eliza Fletcher was living what many would call a charmed life, but she had earned every blessing through her generous spirit and unwavering dedication to others. Standing 5 feet 6 inches tall with bright blonde hair and an infectious smile, she was the kind of person who remembered your birthday, who asked about your kids, who made you feel like the most important person in the room. Eliza taught kindergarten at St. Mary's Episcopal School, where she wasn't just an educator, she was a second mother to dozens of 5- and 6-year-olds who hung on her every word. Parents would specifically request her class because they knew their children would not only learn to read and write, but would discover that learning could be joyful, that school could feel like home. She had this way of making every child feel special, recalled Sarah Martinez, a parent whose daughter had been in Eliza's class. My daughter would come home every day with stories about Miss Eliza, how she helped tie her shoes, how she made math fun with silly songs, how she always had a hug ready for anyone who needed one. But Eliza's most important role was as a mother to her 2 young sons, ages 3 and 5. Her husband Richard often joked that she loved those boys so fiercely it was almost scientific. She studied parenting books, researched the best schools, planned educational adventures that would expand their minds while making them laugh. There was something else that set the Fletchers apart. Eliza was an heiress to a significant hardware fortune, part of the prominent Fletcher family whose business empire had shaped Memphis for generations. Her grandfather had built a company worth hundreds of millions, and Eliza could have chosen a life of leisure and luxury. Instead, she chose service. She chose to spend her days with children who needed her, many of whom came from families that struggled to make ends meet. She bought school supplies with her own money, stayed late to help struggling students, and treated every child as if they were her own. Running had become Eliza's meditation, her escape from the beautiful chaos of teaching and mothering. Every morning at 4:30 a.m., while Memphis still slept under a blanket of humidity and streetlight, she would slip quietly from her midtown home for her sacred routine. The route was always the same, down Central Avenue, past the stately homes and oak trees, toward the University of Memphis campus where the streets were well lit and familiar. She'd done this run hundreds of times, through seasons and weather, building the endurance that had carried her through 2 marathons and countless 5 Burmese chats. On this particular morning, she went through her usual ritual, filled her water bottle, laced up her Brooks running shoes, slipped on her bright pink Nike running top, and grabbed her iPhone to track her pace. She kissed her sleeping sons gently on their foreheads and whispered, "I love you," to Richard before stepping into the darkness. She had no idea that someone had been watching her routine, studying her patterns, waiting in the shadows for the perfect moment to strike. At exactly 4:20 a.m., Eliza Fletcher stepped out of her front door for what would be the last time. Her pink running shirt bright against the darkness, her blonde ponytail bouncing with each step, she looked like any other dedicated athlete starting their day with purpose and determination. By sunrise, what began as a simple morning run had spiraled into a full-scale mystery that would grip the nation and expose failures that should haunt us all. Richard Fletcher was a man of routine himself. Every morning, he woke up precisely at 6:15 a.m. to get their boys ready for school while Eliza finished her run and showered. They had perfected this dance over years of marriage. She would return by 6:45, energized and glowing from her workout, ready to help with breakfast and backpacks and the cheerful chaos of getting two young children out the door. When 7 a.m. came and went with no sign of Eliza, Richard felt the first flutter of unease. By 7:15, that flutter had become a knot in his stomach. By 7:30, he was calling her phone, listening to it ring endlessly before going to voicemail. "Hey babe, where are you? The boys are asking for you, and you know how Jacob gets when his routine changes. Call me back." But the phone kept ringing, unanswered, somewhere in the Memphis morning. Richard made a decision that would probably save precious time in the investigation. Instead of waiting and hoping, he loaded his sons into his car and began driving Eliza's usual running route. His heart pounded as he called her name through the open windows, scanning every sidewalk, every shadow, every alley where she might have stopped to help someone or taken shelter from an unexpected problem. The boys, still sleepy and confused, kept asking where Mommy was. "Daddy's just making sure Mommy's okay," Richard told them, his voice steady despite the panic building in his chest. At 8 a.m. sharp, Richard Fletcher made the call no spouse ever wants to make. "My wife went for a run this morning and never came home," he told the Memphis police dispatcher, his voice cracking on the word, never. Detective James Morrison caught the case, and something about Richard Fletcher's controlled panic told him this wasn't a situation where someone had simply lost track of time or decided to extend their workout. This felt wrong from the very beginning. Within an hour, Memphis police had issued a BOLO alert for Eliza Fletcher. Her description went out to every patrol car in the city. White female, 34 years old, 5 feet 6 inches, blonde hair, last seen wearing a pink running top and dark shorts. But it was the Fletcher family's decision to go public that transformed a local missing person case into a national story. Despite their preference for privacy, despite their prominent position in Memphis society, they made the agonizing choice to expose their pain to the world if it might bring Eliza home. The family press conference at 2 p.m. that day was heartbreaking to watch. Richard Fletcher, flanked by Eliza's parents and brothers, struggled to maintain his composure as he spoke to the gathered media. "Eliza is the heart of our family," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's an incredible mother who tucks our boys in every night and tells them stories about brave princesses and kind dragons. She's a teacher who stays up late making learning games for her students. She's a daughter, a sister, a friend who lights up every room she enters." Eliza's father, a usually private man who had built his fortune by staying out of the spotlight, stepped forward with tears in his eyes. "Someone knows something. Someone saw something. Our daughter, our grandson's mother, is out there somewhere, and we need her home. We're offering a $50,000 reward for any information that leads us to Eliza." The tip line was flooded within hours. Concerned citizens reported everything from suspicious vehicles to unusual sounds in the night. Search teams organized by neighborhoods, with volunteers taking time off work to comb through parks, abandoned buildings, and wooded areas throughout Memphis. Social media exploded with #FindEliza posts. Running groups across the country organized solidarity runs. The story spread beyond Memphis, beyond Tennessee, capturing the attention of people who saw in Eliza Fletcher a mirror of their own lives, someone who could have been their wife, their daughter, their friend. But while the family prayed for answers and the community rallied with hope, investigators were already uncovering chilling clues that suggested this was no random crime of opportunity. Detective James Morrison had worked hundreds of missing person cases in his 20-year career, but something about Eliza Fletcher's disappearance felt calculated from the very beginning. The timing, the location, the precision of it all suggested someone who had planned and waited for the perfect opportunity. The investigation team immediately began canvassing the area around Eliza's running route, knocking on doors, reviewing business security cameras, and interviewing anyone who might have been awake during those crucial pre-dawn hours. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Margaret Chin, an elderly resident who lived 2 blocks from Eliza's usual path. Margaret was an insomniac who often sat by her front window during the early morning hours, watching the neighborhood slowly wake up. "I noticed this dark SUV," Margaret told detectives, her hands shaking as she recalled the details. "It kept driving by, maybe 4 or 5 times between 3:45 and 4:15. Same vehicle, same slow speed. I thought it was strange because it wasn't a delivery truck or anything that would have business in the neighborhood that early." Margaret's security camera had captured everything. The grainy footage showed a dark GMC Terrain circling the neighborhood multiple times, like a predator stalking its prey. The license plate was partially obscured, but forensic video analysts were able to enhance the image enough to make out several crucial digits. But the most chilling discovery came at exactly 4:27 a.m. The camera captured what investigators would later describe as a violent, forced abduction. A figure in bright pink running gear, unmistakably Eliza, was seen near the intersection of Central Avenue and Zach Curlin Street. The footage, though dark and grainy, showed a struggle. The pink figure appeared to be fighting, resisting, before disappearing from view near the dark SUV. The vehicle then sped away, leaving behind only silence and the echo of violence. Racing to the scene, investigators found evidence that painted a terrifying picture of what had happened in those final moments of Eliza's freedom. Her iPhone lay on the asphalt, its screen spiderwebbed with cracks from being dropped during the struggle. The phone was still functional, and when detectives checked her running app, it showed that her workout had stopped abruptly at 4:27 a.m., the exact time the surveillance footage captured the abduction. 20 feet away, investigators found Eliza's champion slides, the sandals she had worn while warming up before her run. They were positioned as if she had been pulled away from them suddenly, one shoe upright, the other on its side. But it was what the crime scene technicians found on those sandals that would crack the case wide open. Hidden in the treads and fabric were microscopic traces of DNA that didn't belong to Eliza or any member of her family. The DNA was immediately sent to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation Laboratory for analysis. In missing person cases, especially potential abductions, DNA evidence is processed on an emergency priority basis. Within 36 hours, the lab had results that made every investigator's blood run cold. The DNA matched a profile already in the criminal database, a name that sent shockwaves through the Memphis Police Department because it was a name they knew all too well. When Detective Morrison saw the name on the report, he had to read it twice to believe it. This wasn't just any random criminal. This was someone whose violence had already scarred Memphis, someone who should have been locked away but wasn't. The results revealed a name investigators knew all too well, a name that should have been behind bars, but through a series of failures, was walking free. Cleotha Apston Henderson. When that name appeared on the DNA report, veteran Memphis detectives felt a collective chill that had nothing to do with the September morning air. Morrison remembered the case from 2000, when he was just a rookie cop. Even then, Apston's crimes had stood out for their shocking brutality and complete lack of remorse. Apston was only 16 years old when he committed a crime so violent and calculated that it would haunt investigators for decades. On a quiet morning not unlike the one when Eliza disappeared, Abston had spotted attorney Kemper Durand leaving his law office early to prepare for court. What happened next revealed the mind of a predator who showed no regard for human life. Abston approached Durand at gunpoint, forced him into his own vehicle, and drove him to multiple ATM locations throughout Memphis, forcing him to withdraw cash at each stop. But the robbery was just the beginning of Durand's nightmare. When Abston decided he had extracted enough money, he didn't simply flee. Instead, he beat Durand so savagely that doctors later said it was a miracle the attorney survived. Durand suffered a broken nose, multiple facial fractures, internal bleeding, and traumatic brain injury that affected his memory and cognitive function for months. The attack was so vicious, so unprovoked, that even hardened prosecutors called it one of the most disturbing cases they'd ever handled. "He didn't just rob me," Durand had testified at Abston's sentencing hearing, his words slurred from the brain injury. "He tried to destroy me for no reason other than he could. He looked me in the eyes while he was beating me, and I saw nothing there. No humanity, no conscience, nothing." Abston was sentenced to 24 years in prison, a sentence that should have kept him locked away until 2024, well into his 40s and theoretically past the peak years for violent crime. But here's where the story takes its first devastating turn. Abston had been released early on parole in November 2020, after serving just 20 years of his sentence. The violent predator who had shown no remorse for nearly killing an innocent man was back on the streets, living just 3.7 miles from where Eliza Fletcher ran every morning. The parole board's records show that Abston had been a model prisoner, at least on paper. He had taken anger management classes, earned his GED, and avoided major disciplinary infractions. What the records didn't show was whether he had truly changed, whether the violence that had nearly killed Kemper Durand still lurked beneath the surface. In the 2 years since his release, Abston had been living in a rundown apartment complex in South Memphis, working sporadically at various construction jobs, and reporting to his parole officer as required. To the outside world, he appeared to be just another ex-convict trying to rebuild his life. But investigators would soon discover that appearances can be devastatingly deceiving. When the DNA match came back, a multi-agency task force was assembled within hours. FBI agents, U.S. Marshals, and Memphis police SWAT teams began surveillance of Abston's known addresses and associates. What they found during their investigation sent chills through even the most experienced investigators. Abston's internet search history in the weeks leading up to Eliza's disappearance revealed a disturbing pattern. Searches for "woman running alone Memphis," "best time to avoid police patrols," and most disturbingly, "how long before someone is considered missing." On September 4th, just 2 days after Eliza's disappearance, the task force moved in. They arrested Abston at his apartment without incident, but his calm demeanor was perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the entire arrest. When they read him his rights, Abston showed no emotion, no surprise, no fear. He invoked his right to remain silent and refused to tell investigators anything about what had happened to Eliza. His only words during the entire arrest were, "I want a lawyer." But while Abston remained silent, the evidence was beginning to tell a story that would horrify everyone who heard it. While Cleotha Abston sat in an interrogation room refusing to speak, forensic investigators were building a case that would ultimately seal his fate and reveal the full horror of what Eliza Fletcher had endured. A search warrant for Abston's apartment uncovered evidence that painted a disturbing picture of premeditation and violence. In his bedroom closet, investigators found clothes that matched exactly what surveillance footage showed the abductor wearing: dark pants, a dark hoodie, and distinctive white sneakers. Even more damning was what they found in his bathroom: recently purchased cleaning supplies, including bleach, plastic gloves, and trash bags, all bought on September 3rd, The day after Eliza's disappearance, according to store receipts found in his kitchen garbage. Cell phone data provided the final pieces of the puzzle. Abston's phone had pinged cell towers in a pattern that perfectly matched the movement of the SUV captured on surveillance cameras. The data showed his phone traveling from his apartment to Eliza's neighborhood in the early morning hours, then moving in a route that would later correspond exactly with where her body would be found. But perhaps most disturbing was what investigators found on Abston's phone itself. In the days following Eliza's disappearance, he had made Google searches that revealed the mind of someone trying to cover up a crime. How long before body decomposes? Do police check vacant buildings? And how to permanently delete phone data. Meanwhile, the search for Eliza had become one of the largest missing person operations in Memphis history. Over 500 volunteers joined professional search teams, combing through abandoned buildings, parks, and wooded areas throughout the city. The community response was overwhelming. Local businesses donated food and water for search teams. Churches organized prayer vigils. Social media campaigns spread Eliza's photo to millions of people across the country. But investigators knew that with each passing hour, the chances of finding Eliza alive were diminishing. The evidence they were uncovering suggested that this case would not have the happy ending everyone was praying for. Still, families clung to hope. Richard Fletcher continued to appear at search staging areas, thanking volunteers personally, his eyes red from sleepless nights but his voice steady with determination. "She's strong," he told anyone who would listen. "Eliza is the strongest person I know. If anyone can survive this, it's her." But even as he spoke those words, investigators were following leads that would soon bring this agonizing search to a heartbreaking conclusion. For 4 agonizing days, Memphis existed in a state of suspended animation. Hope and fear battled in the hearts of thousands of people who had never met Eliza Fletcher but felt connected to her story. Search teams worked around the clock, following every tip, investigating every possible lead. Then, on September 5, 2022, at approximately 5:07 p.m., the call came that everyone dreaded but somehow expected. Victor Johnson, a maintenance worker at a vacant apartment complex on Victor Street in South Memphis, was doing routine groundskeeping when he noticed something that didn't belong near the dumpster behind Building C. What he found would end the search but shatter a family forever. Eliza Fletcher's body was discovered in a wooded area behind the complex, hidden but not well enough to avoid detection much longer. The location was significant. It was less than a mile from Abston's apartment, in an area he would have known well. The medical examiner would later determine that Eliza had died from a gunshot wound to the head, but the evidence at the scene suggested she had fought desperately for her life. Her injuries told the story of someone who had refused to give up, who had battled until the very end. Her running clothes were found scattered nearby, along with her cell phone, the same phone that had been transmitting location data that placed Abston at the scene during the critical time window. The phone's GPS had continued tracking even after Eliza's death, creating a digital trail that would prove crucial in the prosecution. When the news broke, Memphis erupted in grief. Outside St. Mary's Episcopal School, where Eliza had taught, parents and children began arriving with flowers, balloons, and handwritten notes. The makeshift memorial grew throughout the evening as word spread through the community. "Miss Eliza made learning fun," read one child's crayon-scrawled message. "She always smiled at me and helped me read big words." Another note, clearly written by a parent, said simply, "Thank you for loving our children like they were your own." The Fletcher family, in their unimaginable grief, showed the same grace that had defined Eliza's life. Their statement, read by Richard with tears streaming down his face, demonstrated the strength that tragedy sometimes demands. "We are heartbroken and devastated by this senseless loss. Eliza was a joy to so many, a wonderful daughter, an incredible mother, a beloved teacher. Her light will continue to shine through the lives she touched. At the University of Memphis, students and faculty held a candlelight vigil. Hundreds of runners gathered, many wearing pink in honor of Eliza's final outfit. They stood in silence as speaker after speaker shared stories of her impact, the kindergartners she had taught to read, the struggling families she had helped anonymously, the way she made everyone around her feel valued and loved. But even as Memphis mourned, investigators were uncovering information that would expose something even more disturbing, a system failure that could have prevented this tragedy entirely. As investigators built their case against Cleotha Abston, they uncovered a truth so infuriating it would spark outrage across the nation and legislative action across multiple states. Just 11 months before Eliza's murder, in September 2021, another woman had fallen victim to Abston's violence. Alicia Franklin was a 22-year-old college student at the University of Memphis, working 2 jobs to pay for her education while pursuing a degree in social work. On a warm September evening, Alicia was walking home from her job at a local restaurant when Abston approached her. What started as what seemed like a random encounter, a man asking for directions, quickly turned into every woman's worst nightmare. Abston forced Alicia behind a residential building and attempted to sexually assault her. But Alicia was a fighter, just like Eliza would be months later. She managed to scratch Abston's face, knee him in the groin, and escape before he could complete the attack. Bruised, terrified, but alive, Alicia did everything the system asks of sexual assault survivors. She immediately called 911. She went to the hospital for a rape kit examination, enduring hours of invasive procedures while evidence was collected from under her fingernails, from her clothes, from her body. She provided detailed statements to detectives, describing Abston's appearance, his voice, his behavior. She worked with a sketch artist to create a composite drawing. When police showed her a photo lineup 2 weeks later, she immediately identified Abston as her attacker. The DNA evidence from the attempted assault was conclusive. Abston's genetic material was all over Alicia's clothes and under her fingernails. It should have been an open and shut case that would have sent him back to prison for violating his parole. But here's where the system catastrophically failed. That rape kit sat unprocessed in the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation laboratory for 11 months. The TBI lab, like crime labs across the country, was drowning in a backlog of untested rape kits. Understaffing, budget constraints, and bureaucratic inefficiencies had created a situation where even priority cases were taking months or years to process. If Alicia's DNA evidence had been analyzed within the standard 30-day timeframe, Abston's parole would have been revoked immediately. He would have been back in prison where he belonged, serving out the remainder of his original sentence plus additional time for the new assault. Eliza Fletcher would have completed her morning run on September 2nd, returned home to make breakfast for her sons, and gone to school to teach her kindergarten class about the letter F and the sound it makes. The timeline was devastatingly clear. Alicia's attack in September 2021, evidence collected but not processed. Abston remaining free throughout 2022. Eliza's murder in September 2022. The DNA from Alicia's kit finally processed in October 2022, 1 month too late. When this information became public, Alicia Franklin made the courageous decision to speak out, despite the re-traumatization of reliving her attack. At a press conference arranged by her attorney, she spoke through tears but with unwavering strength. "I did everything right. I reported immediately, I cooperated fully, I trusted the system to protect other women by putting this monster back in prison where he belonged. But the system failed me, and because it failed me, it failed Eliza Fletcher too." Her voice broke as she continued, "I think about her every day. I think about her children who will grow up without their mother. I think about how different things could have been if someone had just done their job." It was a devastating truth that would echo through courtrooms and legislative chambers. This tragedy could have been prevented if the system designed to protect victims had actually worked. On October 5, 2022, Cleatha Abston was indicted on charges of first-degree murder, especially aggravated kidnapping, tampering with evidence, and theft. The evidence against him was so overwhelming that even his defense team knew they were fighting an uphill battle. Surveillance footage placed him at the scene. DNA evidence tied him to the crime. Cell phone data tracked his movements before, during, and after the abduction. His own internet searches revealed consciousness of guilt and attempts to cover up the crime. Initially, Abston pleaded not guilty, forcing the Fletcher family to prepare for a trial that would relive their worst nightmare in excruciating detail. His defense team, grasping for any possible strategy, argued mental illness, childhood trauma, anything that might spare him from Tennessee's death penalty. The pretrial hearings were emotionally devastating for everyone involved. Crime scene photos, surveillance footage, and forensic evidence painted a picture of violence that was difficult for even seasoned court reporters to witness. But as jury selection approached and the prosecution's case became airtight, reality set in for Abston's legal team. On February 23, 2023, in a packed Memphis courtroom filled with Eliza's family, friends, and colleagues, Abston changed his plea to guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was one of the most emotionally charged proceedings in Memphis legal history. Eliza's colleagues from St. Mary's Episcopal School filled the gallery, many wearing pink ribbons in her honor. Her kindergarten students, now in first grade, had made a card for the judge that simply said, "We miss Miss Eliza. She was the best teacher ever." Richard Fletcher's victim impact statement brought the courtroom to tears. "Eliza was the love of my life, the best mother our boys could have asked for. She died because this man chose violence over humanity, because he decided his desires mattered more than her life, more than our children's future. But even in death, Eliza's goodness shines brighter than his evil." Abston was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Judge Karen Massey read the sentence, Abston showed no emotion, no remorse, no acknowledgement of the devastation he had caused. He stared straight ahead, as empty and cold as he had been during his arrest. But for the Fletcher family and the Memphis community, the real victory wasn't in seeing their loved one's killer behind bars. It was in ensuring that Eliza's death would catalyze changes that could save other lives. The Tennessee legislature passed the Eliza Fletcher Act in March 2023, mandating that rape kits be processed within 30 days and providing $2 million in additional funding for crime lab staffing and equipment. Alicia Franklin testified in support of the legislation, her courage helping transform her own trauma into protection for future victims. On what would have been Eliza's 35th birthday, hundreds of runners gathered at sunrise for Finish Eliza's Run. They came from across the country, teachers, mothers, fathers, students, all united by the belief that fear should never win, that evil should never silence the good. Richard Fletcher was there with his two sons, who released pink balloons into the Memphis morning sky. As the balloons disappeared into the clouds, one of the boys asked, "Is Mommy running with him now, Daddy?" "Yes," Richard whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She's running ahead of all of us, showing us the way." One woman's life was stolen too soon by a predator who should have been caged and a system that failed at the worst possible moment. But her light continues to inspire a city and a nation to fight for safety, justice, and change. Eliza Fletcher's final run ended in tragedy, but her race for justice continues in every processed rape kit, every reformed law, every runner who refuses to let fear win. In the end, love and justice proved stronger than evil, just as Eliza would have wanted it to be. What would you have done if someone close to you disappeared without a trace? How can we better protect the innocent while ensuring that those who commit crimes face swift justice? The answers to these questions may determine whether tragedies like Eliza Fletcher's ever happen again. Thanks for tuning in to The Witness Wall. If you're new to this channel, kindly like and subscribe for more gripping true crime stories. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.